Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai. Welcome to this ordinary meeting of Nelson City Council on Wednesday, the 9th of September. I want to start today's meeting with acknowledging the passing of a member of staff, the wonderful Catherine Hunziker, who passed away last week. Catherine was a hugely important member of our customer services team and a woman who was absolutely full of life and energy, a wonderful wife, daughter and mother and grandmother. Her service is being held at the moment, will just be concluding at Shonan Shirley, and Jane McLeod is there to represent the council. So I just want today to, when we say karakia, to reflect on Catherine's life. It's only the second time in my time on council where we've lost a staff member, and it has an enormous impact on all of us. This is a really close-knit team, and today we really do acknowledge Catherine and her family, and we share absolute sorrow about with Catherine's passing. We're flying our council flag today at half-mast to acknowledge her life, her service to this community, and the love that she had for her family. So I'm going to invite our Kaihotu Pania to lead karakia today, and Pania might just have a few words that she wants to say just about life and death and community. Kia ora, Pania.
Kia ora tātou. Before we do the karakia, this is a karakia that is familiar to council and councillors. Tātai whakapapa. Tātai whakapapa is about genealogy. And in the karakia, it talks about the Māori deities, Rangi, the sun, Papa, Earth Mother, Rongo, the god of peace, Tāne Mahuta, the god of the forests and birds, Tangaroa, the god of oceans, Tūmata Uinga, the god of war. He's known for the god of war, but he's actually the god of debate, discussion, and who seeks resolution. So he's not just about fighting. He seeks to resolve an issue and challenges. Haumea tiki tiki is the gardens and vegetables and fruit. Tāwhirimatea is the god of the winds, the raging winds. And so all of these atua or deities play a role in how we are, how we behave. Some are more stronger at different times. Sometimes we need to be peaceful. Sometimes we need to challenge and debate. And sometimes we need to till the land. So basically, tātai whakapapa is the genealogy of life consciousness and awareness, and that we're aware of each other and the elements within our environment and our universe. And when people pass over, their existence still continues in our hearts and in our memories. So I really love this karakia, and it's not just about Māori mythology of Atua Māori, but it's much deeper and about consciousness and conscious awareness and life itself. So kia ora tātou, we can all do this karakia. Iti. Ko rangi, ko papa, ka puta, ko rongo, ko tāne mahuta, ko tangaroa, ko tūmata uinga, ko haumea tiki tiki, ko tāwhirimatea, tōko nā te rangi ki runga, ko papa ki raro, ka puta te ira tangata, ki te hae ao, ki te ao marama, e rongo waka iria ake ki runga, Kia tina. Kuie kaikie.
Kia ora, Pania. Thank you for leading us through karakia today and the reflection on what makes life and living and the importance of the place, the people, and the universe that we're part of. Today we've got a quite specific agenda. We've got the reflection on the City Centre Streets for People project, and we've got the City Development team who are here to present that report. There are a few slight additions to what has been distributed, and I'll ask Ms Gavellini to talk through that when she comes forward to present the report. Just in terms of procedurally today, we are live streaming. We are joined today by Claire Pascoe, who is the lead advisor for urban mobility from Waka Kotahi, and I'm just going to check that Claire can hear us and that we can hear her. So Claire, I think you may be with us on Zoom, so I'll just invite you to say hello.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
Kia ora, Claire, absolutely we can. So thank you very much for taking the time to be part of the meeting today. Claire's here to listen, and if through the course of the meeting you've got any questions in relation to Waka Kotahi's involvement with this project, then Claire's available to answer any questions. I haven't received any apologies. I think everybody is here today. Does anyone need to leave at a particular time? Do I need to be aware of any time commitments? No, thank you. If there are any interests in relation to matters on the agenda, then I'll just invite you to signal those to me so we can record them in the minutes. And a reminder, of course, to keep your interest register up to date by advising either at a meeting that you have an interest register update, or making sure that you let the governance advisors know so that they can keep the register in order. Also, just a reminder that if you have interests that no longer apply, could you also make sure that you let the governance advisors know so they can remove those interests? Appreciate that, because I know from time to time you'll be serving as office holders on various organisations, and then through the year with AGMs those change, so it's good to do those updates. We have, to the best of my knowledge, Robin, no public forum today. That's correct. And in that case, we'll move on to the Mayor's report. And the Mayor's report is set out on page 5. And as I've said in the Mayor's report, it's an unusual thing for me to be sitting at this table with a lack of surety about where this meeting's going to go, and also how are we going to, I'm going to say, land the plane today. I have absolute respect for the work that the officers have put into the report that's with us today. Late last week, both Lisa and Ellen and Councillor Rainey met with me because there'd been some follow-up engagement with Waka Kotahi subsequent to the agenda being issued, and some thinking around maybe some hybrid options. Now, they weren't able to be included in the agenda because the agenda was issuing that day, and so we have distributed those separately. So I just want to make sure that everybody has got those documents. I think there are 2. Has everybody got those? Yes, yes, excellent. Okay, so just yes, 2 pictures. So you should have these ones. You should have this one here, and this one as well. So you've got those 2. They were. Okay, email was circulated yesterday afternoon, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at those. I felt they were, I was really impressed with what was presented here, but what I was really conscious of, as I've said in the report, is that I have had, and Alan has had no chance to engage with the city centre group that he has been working with, to be able to seek some feedback from community members. And as Councillor Courtney said, I haven't had an opportunity to engage with you as elected members either around those designs, but I felt as they had been produced, I wouldn't have wanted to have come into a process and left things away from the table. So I thought it was important that we had them. I had the opportunity on Saturday just to pop in and see a few of our city businesses who have been engaging with Alan and Lisa through this process. And I just wanted to sort of have a sense check of how they felt about what is a different design to hybrid. And I found that actually quite useful feedback. There is still a real sense of uncertainty about creating change. The impact of COVID-19 has created a real disturbance to business, to commerce, to even to how people interact and move through their city. And I think the response was one of absolute belief in the work that the city centre team is engaging in, absolute confidence in Lisa and Alan and the rest of their team, a desire to continue to work with them, a desire to see the investment that we've talked about as a council and a community, to see the 6 key moves come to life, but also a real desire to do this well and to have the time to have the conversations and to build the relationships. And I have to say that in the projects that we've undertaken as a council, the importance of taking people with us, you'll never get everybody with us, but the importance of maintaining relationships is critically important to council success. And as Mayor, I think long and hard about the importance of those relationships. And I work on a principle of do no harm. And that means really thinking about the value proposition of what we're doing, of the projects and what we're trying to achieve and maintaining momentum. So I have a dilemma today, which I've set out in this report, is saying stop doesn't feel like maintaining momentum. Continuing with the conversations and the relationships is really important. And I met with Alan and Lisa again yesterday, and we reflected on the feedback that I'd had from the conversations I had on the weekend and a few phone calls. We have wonderful members of our community that believe in the 6 key moves, and they believe in the importance of improving our streetscape and urban spaces. And I feel quite strongly that we can do better than what is there at the moment. I don't think that's the best that we can be as a city. And I think that view is held very widely around this council table, that we want to continue to invest in places for people, for the delivering those 6 key moves that are important. And so when I'm sitting here, I'm constantly thinking about how do we best achieve that. So this is going to be a meeting where we're going to have a bit of a conversation, because as I said today, I still don't know how we're going to land the plane. I've got some thinking in my head, but I really want to hear from all of you. And I want to hear your reflections on your community as we go through this process. I'm also going to take some time for Alan and Lisa to talk through the report and what's happened subsequent to the report being issued. And I also just want to give Pat an opportunity to talk about as Chief Executive. This is, the Chief Executive is the owner of the agenda until it is issued, and then it becomes my agenda as Mayor, as the Chair of the meeting, to work with you how we're going to transact what is in here. But I do want to give Pat an opportunity just to be able to just speak to his support for the recommendation that came from the officers. So that pretty much sets the scene through the Mayor's report. Are there any questions from elected members? I'm very happy to take those. Councillor Courtney.
I'm happy, Madam Mayor, to move the acceptance of the report. But in so doing, as I mentioned to you prior to the meeting, it says in paragraph 3.2 there that second line, I considered that there has not been sufficient time to discuss these hybrid options with business owners prior to the agenda being issued. And I said to you as an aside, councillors should be included in that as well, because I had my hybrid number 2 put on my desk for me to read at 5 o'clock last night, and I read it at lunchtime today. So that gives you an idea. The second point I'd like to make is I'm pleased that you did pick up in your remarks just now the uncertainties that are out there. They are real. And I think it's the unknown that's the problem, and we all are facing that. But I have been in business for 30, 40 years in Nelson Province, and I have never seen the business in such a stressed position. I have to say that. So as we're going to discuss this today, please bear that in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney. And I tell you what, I'll move receiving my report and I'll let you second it. How about we do it that way? Is that all right? And I agree with Councillor Courtney's response. This has come. There's been a lot of work going into this report and into this project to get it to this point, and I respect people that work up to the nth hour, still trying to look at different ways of solving problems, and I want to really acknowledge Claire and her input and her commitment to Nelson, to Whakatū. She's been fantastic, and so we really thank her for the time that she's put into working with the team. I think she's had met with Councillor Roney as well, done Zoom calls really to sort of tease this out. So thank you. But it has meant that we're coming today, and there's not much to read because they're two pictures. So I felt it was better that you had them before the meeting rather than tabled today, just so that you can do some thinking. Councillor Courtney has focused on the impact on people from COVID-19, and it has made it more difficult to engage on this project. With going back into level 2, that has interfered in some of the engagement processes that we would have wanted to undertake. I was updated yesterday on the latest Infometrics projections, and at this point we're looking at probably a much longer tail to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic over many years. The projections in terms of tourism are now being moved out to where we were talking at the start of this, being back at a 70% recovery by the middle of next year. That was when we first started. We're now looking at those numbers not coming back to 2025. So they've moved from initially thinking this would be a year, then, a few weeks ago they were at 2 years. Now they're looking more like out at 5 years in terms of the impact. So that's the live scenario that we're sitting with today. But of course, we still need to continue to make decisions and to work with our community. So any other questions? No, in that case, I'll move that we receive the report. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So now I will invite the team members to whether they're going to come down to the table or talk to us from your seats. That is up to you. It's a little bit squashed to all come down, so rather stay there. All right, that's fine. And that will just mean for those of you who are sitting across from me that you'll just have to swivel around in your seats to be able to make eye contact with our officers. So Ms. Gabellini, I'll hand across to you and to introduce the report and just also just expand on the context for the additional hybrid option. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. So the report sets out the background to how we got to where we are today in section 4, but just briefly as an overview, we went out for, Streets for People went out for public consultation on the 1st of June and closed on the 26th of June. And during that time, Alan's awesome application to Waka Kotahi got approved. And so we came out of that consultation period knowing that we had the support of NZTA. The feedback we received during the consultation period is summarised in the report, but we essentially had 43% of feedback was that we should leave the streets the way that they are, and 39% of people wanted to see that this Trafalgar Street was closed to vehicles. There was not a lot of support to options 1 and 2, which were the different amounts of footpath widening and car park removal. A lot of the feedback process was qualitative, so a lot of the feedback, there was a lot of comments in there that said things like, I like option 1, but I like option 2 better, or I like option 2 if you did X, Y, Z. But most people's preference was for, of the people that wanted to do something, was for option 3. So straight after the feedback closed, there wasn't much time, I think about 2 weeks, for officers to prepare the deliberations report for the initial meeting. And it became clear that to give it proper consideration, particularly that qualitative feedback where people were making suggestions about how options could be approved and could be more acceptable, that we needed further time and more engagement. And so Alan's really been working flat out, having meetings and breakfasts and webinars, answering emails and service requests. He's had something like 15 task force meetings during the consultation period and after it closed, looking at how we can address the feedback that's been raised and how a hybrid might provide some kind of middle ground or compromise. It was quite hard writing the officers' report. We had a lot of conversations about whether or not there is a mandate to propose one of the different options, given that feedback was so split, and also given that we hadn't had. Given that the meetings that we had with business task force owners on the hybrid hadn't really come to any unanimous conclusion about the best option or the best way forward. In the feedback, we also received a lot of comments that it was hard to see where we were going with this and how did any of these options lead to the greater vision, that we have the 6 key moves, but isn't the spatial plan going to be providing the community with the vision of how that's going to look, or how the 6 key moves are going to translate on the ground? And so how does any one of these options take us on that journey or lead us on that path? And we also had, we had a few bumps in the road, like we had the free parking during COVID, which caused quite a high demand for parking, and a feeling, I guess, in the business and retail area that parking is a scarcity in Nelson, and that was somewhat driven by the free parking during COVID. We had the change to pay by plate, and we've had there's some statistics in the report that we can go through later, where we have had our preliminary results from pay by plate, and that does show an improvement in car parking turnover. But we've also talked about having the parking strategy done, and so a lot of the feedback was that all of these were critical things that people supported. They do support doing something in our city centre because it is tired and old, but can't really see how any of these options link to any of these other strategies and visions. And so it was really a sort of a cart before the horse type feedback. And so in deliberating on the options, we considered that quite a lot. And so really the officer's recommendation boils down to 2 key reasons, and that is really about despite all that really good relationship building and time investment and exploration of alternatives and hybrids, there isn't really general support for any of those options, and that's because people are finding it hard to see how that's going to land without this spatial vision for the city centre. And the second reason for the officer's recommendation was that there simply isn't capacity and time now in the NZTA 12-month funding and build timeline for the city development team, for Alan. There's only one of him to be able to go out there and do all of that work, go through a co-design process, which is a requirement of NZTA, do a design and get something built before the end of the financial year. And if we were to down tools and put all the pressure on Alan to be able to achieve that, then we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the other important parts of our workload, including the city centre spatial plan, which we really need to inform the long-term plan process. So it's really about the vision, the timing, the sequencing, and the capacity, and the need to have not only organisational support from our other colleagues in the organisation that we work with, but also full backing, full political backing if we were to ever go down one of those paths.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll come across to questions in a moment, but I just want to now touch on the ongoing discussions that you've been having with Claire and the hybrid design that you dropped into me on last Friday. So I don't know whether, Alan, you want to lead off on that discussion, and then Claire, I'll probably come across to you just to see if you want to add anything else. That is Claire, who's on Zoom with Claire Pascoe's. Claire Pascoe's on Zoom. Councillor Noonan. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mayor. So we last had a full meeting with our City Centre Business Task Force on the 19th of August, where we specifically talked about the report and the 4 options. And at that time, the one hybrid, which was sort of a combination of all 4 on the central block of Trafalgar between Bridge and Hardy Street. And that particular hybrid had visibility with the task force in a meeting prior, and even in a workshop a little bit with this council in July. When we met with Waka Kotahi, and that was with 3 representatives, so Claire was part of that. That was on Thursday, the 27th of August. There was an idea around our hybrids about how can we maybe consolidate what we were looking at in the hybrid. So instead of stretching it out across that full block, maybe we can concentrate it on half of the block. And maybe it's the block closest to upper Trafalgar. So you have a sequence from a full pedestrian mall to something that feels pedestrian prioritized to an area that retains more or less the same to the north of the mid-block crossing at Farmers. So we drew that up, and that wasn't drawn up. So, we had a meeting on Thursday. In a week's time, we had it drawn up, but we had not come back to our task force, and it was not included in the report, as Lisa, the mayor's stated earlier. So while I think there's some interesting things with looking at that hybrid 2 that was issued to councillors late yesterday, it hasn't had visibility. And I know the mayor, I think, talked to some of those retailers over the weekend. We haven't done as much work around that to know how many car parks could be retained. I mean, I know roughly north of the mid-block that there are 35, but how many we could work in the detail with those footpath expansions and things like that. So there's a lot of unknown. There's a range of technical challenges we know with doing this work in any form. The crown and profile of Trafalgar Street is pretty severe. It is our golden mile. We've picked the hardest street to do this on. I recognize that, but our data from our public life survey says that's where all the people are. It makes sense to do the intervention where people are going to be. And these are going to be places that Nelsonites and people who visit here want to remember, and they want to support those businesses. But we really have only developed that particular option after discussion with Waka Kotahi really in the last week. So that's a little bit of context on that. Claire might want to add more.
Thank you, Alan. Claire, I'll come across to you on Zoom and just give you an opportunity to talk through the process and engagement that you have participated in relation to this project.
Thank you, and thanks again for having me along. I'll be starting my video, and I should just let you all know I'm actually in my office, so you may see my colleagues come and go. So yeah, we've sort of been working alongside your team and trying to understand the context of your project. When we first came across this project in the form and the application form, our first thought was, wow, this is probably, this has the potential to be one of our kind of high profile gold star projects in terms of the location in a town centre that it is already quite vibrant, but is looking to kind of add vibrancy and create a place that's even more attractive for people to come and spend time in. So we were really excited about this one. I think that where some of the conversations have gone in the last few weeks are I mean, we acknowledge that there's definitely a lot going on in Nelson, and there is some the projects around the spatial planning work. There's actually quite a lot of interrelationship, we think, between this pilot and some of the wider work going on for the city. And from our perspective, I guess there does seem to be a good opportunity to use this approach, this tactical approach, which is all about kind of piloting and testing and helping to take people, I guess, on a longer term journey of change by a smaller project that effectively isn't out there using concrete curbs and things that are very permanent, so people can actually get a feel for what change or what the space would be like before it's in concrete for forevermore. So we think the approach your team is taking is really sensible. I think we'd support the hybrid approach, which does look to kind of scope it down a little, and that's, I guess, selfishly also because we have this time frame on this fund for things to be delivered by June next year, and we would prefer to see something scaled down, implemented, rather than it dying altogether. So yeah, we're excited. I think one of the things we've seen all around the country is the importance of coming back to and remembering what success looks like and what really was the vision of this thing right from the start. So as I understand it, this project is really about creating a place that attracts people to spend time, obviously also to spend money. And Nelson, I guess, has that example already in the Upper Trafalgar Street area of what it looks like when you do create that space. So we think you're a perfect location to continue on. You know what it looks like when it works. You know that people love that space, and being really driven, I guess, to come back to what success looks like and make sure that you're measuring and evaluating, well, is this thing giving us what we want, will help you have the evidence base you need as to whether you turn it into a permanent thing with concrete.
Thank you, Claire. Claire, one thing that I just while I put you there, one of the bits of feedback that I had from Alan was your willingness to help with one of our challenges, which is the need for the talented people to support this project, and a willingness for the funding to be used actually for human resource to help with the co-design engagement process. So I just want to test it out with you. I understood that was something that you were prepared to look at.
Absolutely, and that's been a core focus for Innovating Streets, is that this methodology of trialling and piloting things is quite new for New Zealand, and we see this whole year as a real opportunity for councils and people in the sector to upskill, and that really requires more resourcing in people time sometimes than it does in actual kind of normal project costs we're used to with big heavy construction costs. So we would expect these projects to have a much higher percentage of them on people time and professional services, and we've set the project up so that Alan and your other project leads have got lots of support from peers around the country. We've got about another 34 town centres that are looking to make upgrades that Alan's got access to those people and their learnings, but we've also brought in some people. So Mike Lydon from New York, who's probably our global expert in these sorts of projects, he's on tap to offer kind of hour-long clinics whenever people need them, and we're kind of growing our expertise around the country as well. So we're all in behind you, but we do recognise it's not easy and there are challenging decisions to make. I'd say if you're showing your community is 50% behind doing something, that might not sound very much, but for projects like this and the first time you do them, that's actually a pretty good demonstration of support. And what often happens is once you've proved success, that number goes up significantly the next time.
Thanks, Claire. Just a first sort of follow-up question. When we, and this is around timing, so I've heard Lisa, Lisa's talked through some of the challenges here, and time is certainly one of our big challenges, and going back into level 2. So that's been, hasn't been helpful for actually some of the engagement processes that we would have wanted to go through. One thing that when I reflect on where we've had success, and I think, thank you for, that's what we need to think about. What does success look like? When we closed up at Trafalgar Street, we went through the process for that. We probably spent probably 18 months of engagement time before we did a trial, and we did a shorter trial, and then we did more engagement, and then we went back and did a longer trial, and then the third time we decided to make it a permanent closure. So I understand that you've got some time constraints around this particular funding stream, but I'm interested in whether there's a willingness from Waka Kotahi to continue to support us through this engagement process, recognising that this is, as Alan said, he's chosen with this particular project. It's a big one, and and it is a well. It's a kind of a well location, and so the co-design process is going to be quite complicated potentially in this space. Maybe there's a conversation to be had about do we look at smaller scale, as you've said, doing some smaller scale. Maybe other locations within the city. Is there a willingness at your end to have some flexibility around those conversations and actually finally landing the project?
Yeah, there's an absolute willingness to support you as required to get this project in. Where I guess our parameters is around the funding. And so that 90% funding assistance rate runs out in June. So that's why, we will support you to, if you want to, if you feel like the co-design process is something that is going to take a longer term for the bigger thing, but you want to work in kind of a way where you could test little pieces of it within that time, we will definitely support that approach. We will support you after that, but it'll be at more at a 50% FAR type situation, a normal funding, and we're working to integrate this kind of piloting process into our business as usual funding processes, but that is will be at the normal funding assistance rate. So our parameter is simply that the 90% FAR is only until June, the end of the National Land Transport program.
Thank you, Claire. That's really helpful, and thank you so much for that commitment. That's fantastic. I'm now just going to go, and I'll come around to questions from everyone in a moment. I'm actually going to go across to Ms. Barton, the other Claire. Claire is the lead for this business unit and this branch of council. I'd like to get your thoughts before I go across to Pat.
So thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. The excitement, the potential excitement of this project is enormous. But I have to take my hat off to both Alan and Lisa for recognising the impact that this project may have on the council, both from an external reputational risk point of view, but also from an internal delivery point of view. So in terms of the external risk component, we haven't, as the Mayor's outlined, up at Trafalgar Street, we took a significant amount of time engaging over what was being proposed with the community and with the retailers. We haven't done this on the hybrid model that's now been put in front of you today. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. And to do it properly, it's probably going to take a significant number of months, which then impacts on the ability to deliver, to use the funding that's on offer from Waka Kotahi. So there's a reputational risk externally. That's compounded by the fact that we would require capital projects to deliver the project. And at the moment, you're aware that they have a significant workload. Something would have to drop off. The time period in which they are able to deliver that is up until the end of June of next year. We all know that project delivery from a capital projects point of view, that's on speed times 500. And so the risk gets compounded about whether we can actually deliver that to the community. That then becomes a question of whether we're being prudent in doing that. And the other component for me that is really critical is that we have built a relationship now with particularly the retailers, but also the landlords, et cetera, in the city centre. And one of the key messages that they have given us as we've gone through this is bring us with you. And I think that there is a risk in this that we're not bringing them with us. We're saying this is what we're going to do. The spatial plan is a key component of being able to say what our vision is as a city. That, as Lisa has said, is putting the cart before the horse if we do this particular project. And I think that's a critical foundation for any future work. Now, that's not to say that this project won't necessarily happen. It's saying we do the spatial plan first, we then think about that, we do the business case, we do the project properly. We can then apply to Waka Kotahi for the 50% FAR funding. And at this point in time, we haven't done a detailed cost estimate for this particular project. So we may end up, I think they've been offering us 900,000 or roughly that order. If the costs go up, we could end up with a similar amount through the 50% FAR funding. So I see some significant risk here for us as a council for delivering for our community, and I would just like us to think about the strategy first, delivery second.
Thank you, Claire. I'll go across to Pat. Anything you want to add, Pat?
Councillor Fulton, I'm crushed. So I just want to talk about some more pragmatic things about delivery of this project. They are questions that I would have asked to be addressed if the recommendation had been to go ahead, but the recommendation was to defer, which gave time to answer the questions that I had. But if there's a prospect that this council may decide to go ahead, then I need to draw them to your attention. The first thing is we haven't seen this kit, this particular piece of kit yet, in terms of what it looks like on a temporary basis. I haven't seen a piece of it. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it's going to be like to work with. The crossfall in Trafalgar Street is something that Alan and Lisa talk about a lot. It's steep, and we're not quite sure how this temporary platform will merge with that crossfall. But the drawings show something that's looking flat, and my worry is it's not going to be flat. It's going to be sloping. Or do we have to skin the top of Trafalgar Street to achieve something that looks flat? I don't know, but that's not something that I want to find out later on. How is the road going to drain once we put this piece of kit in place? And how do we clean the footpaths once these temporary platforms are in place? I don't know. What's going to happen in autumn when the leaves drop? Do they fall through the gaps in the timber, and then block the gutters? And again, we've got to get at them. Or do they sit on top of the timber boardwalk, and then we've got to find some other way of cleaning them? And how slippery is this when it's wet, and how slippery is it when it's got leaves on it? Because those are things that will be very important to the public. None of these things are insurmountable, but they're the sorts of things you want the answers to before you start embarking on such a big project. And look, that's no criticism of Alan or Lisa. They've been working like two staff on steroids to get this proposal to the point it's at, and I think with the recommendation they've got, we have time to address these things, absolutely and completely. But the other thing I just want to talk about is what it's like delivering a project on the main street. I was here when the bricks went in. I was here when we replaced the culvert up Trafalgar Street, and I had the joy of inheriting a project in Otaki where we changed the main street that did not go well. And you would have seen what it was like in Richmond when the Queen Street project ran over time and budget. It's not a good place to be when your main project is in your main street and you get the microscope applied to you every day, and particularly if you don't have the answer to some of the detailed questions that I've just been talking about. And I'm looking at the resources we'd need for this project. I'd need almost certainly a full-time comms person. I'd need the full-time engagement person. I think this would pull staff out of the transport team. It would take people out of the capital projects team, and we'd probably need some sort of high-level project management group to be responding to issues very quickly as they arose. And this is on top of a team when we've talked a lot about staff fatigue. And again, I just have to acknowledge Lisa and Alan. They're both tired and they would have to commit a lot to this project. And I just don't think we're in a fit state to deliver it at the moment. I think there are some, I love the look of these hybrid options. I think there's something really exciting there. And all those years ago when the council was put in the brick pavers, that was an exciting time too. But I know that we had a lot of the answers worked out before we started working on the main street. That's not the place to be trying to find those answers. So I like the idea of more consultation, trying to get more of the retailers with us. I doubt that we'll get all of them, but improving that support would be useful. And to running some quiet trials somewhere so that we have the answers to the questions that I've just raised. Because I just can't imagine anything worse than trying to deliver this project when we're struggling for resources and we don't have the answers. And every time we make a mistake, the retailers ring up the media and we're in the front page of the newspaper again. It will not enhance our reputation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. All right. I think that's enough scene setting. You've got the feedback from all of the participants here. I do just want to go across to Councillor Rainey as chair of the City Centre Working Group. See if Councillor Rainey wants to add anything to the background.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to take my hat off to the staff really in regards to the way that they've engaged, because it really has been pretty comprehensive, and it has come as somewhat of a surprise to be bombarded with emails over the last 24 hours from various retailers. When in fact, we've actually been engaging with a lot of those retailers over some long period of time with some really good open discussions. And it seems to me that there is a genuine appetite from the majority of retailers in the city and property owners to see some change. So I would be interested to know, and I really respect the conversation that's been going on, I'd be really interested to know what is change going to look like and how we're going to achieve it, because indeed the questions that get thrown up are sort of not being answered by the process that we're going through today. In fact, we're probably just posing more questions over how we're going to try and achieve some changes to our central city. So I would sincerely hope that the good rapport that we've built up between NCC and the business owners and property owners in the central city doesn't go away. And I would like to echo that good rapport with the huge amount of supporters who do want to see change, who we've only really heard from through the submission process as opposed to actually meeting with on a regular basis. Because indeed this needs to be a community conversation. I am frustrated that we're not potentially able to take advantage of a hugely willing partner who see this as a great opportunity. And I think as elected members, we've got to really pay a lot of attention to what Claire from Waka Kotahi has been saying to us today. I will have more things to say when we get down to debating, but I just really want to say again, big thanks to the team. It's been a great process to be engaged in.
Thank you, Councillor Rainey, and I want to acknowledge the work that you've put into this as well as chair of the working group. You have been out there doing hours and hours of this engagement as well, and I've had very positive feedback in terms of the interaction, so thank you very much for your leadership. I also acknowledge the conversations that you've been having with Waka Kotahi and with Claire, and I felt very positive about Claire's feedback to us today, that she's going to be with us, and if we decide we want to continue with that engagement, they'll still be with us. If we want to try some different things, they'll still stay with us. So I'm appreciate that, and that doesn't happen. That happens through goodwill and good relationships and good communication. So thank you again. Now, in terms of the questions, I'm now going to go to the Deputy Mayor, then Councillor Laurie, and then Councillor Stenson, and then I'll gather everybody else up as you signal to me.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So my first question is, I guess just one of confusion. So if, for example, in the survey data, if we'd got a clear preference for one of the change options, how would we have had the internal capacity to deliver on that? Because we're being told today that, you know, vision, timing, sequencing, internal capacity are, you know, clear drivers as to why we should cease everything. But if we had that clear mandate, I'm just wondering how, would the recommendation still be to do nothing? And why maybe that wasn't identified earlier before these first reports came up?
Through the Mayor, so I guess it does appear like we have bitten off more than we can chew. So way back in lockdown, when this concept came out, we, you know, workloads were in array, things were put on hold, things became more important than other things, and this Streets for People jumped ahead of our thinking and programming in terms of the spatial plan. Things have been changing and fast moving, and so capacity is an issue because we've had chops and changes with COVID. But in hindsight, we also didn't really know that Waka Kotahi required this co-design process, which is very resource intensive. So yeah, I wonder, I think Ellen and I would have to think really hard if the feedback was, you know, 70% 30 like it was for Upper Trafalgar Street, and what our recommendation would be. So I can't really say what the, if we were going to recommend that we do something, then it would have to have been accompanied by a recommendation that said we need extra resourcing in XYZ areas that the Chief Executive has just pointed out, and that would come at a cost, and that doesn't really fit with our zero rates increase, and, you know, there are no additional staff to be had to help us do that.
Okay, thank you. So just in relation to resourcing, so we heard from Claire Pascoe that NZTA would certainly be supportive with the co-design process, so would other councils working through this. We would have local resources that we could probably engage. If we were to look at a smaller option, because I believe that the budget that was allowed for actually enabled quite an extensive project, whereas if we went for a smaller project, then wouldn't the resourcing enable us to contract those extra engagement, project management, etc. resources within the existing budget that we have allocated?
Yeah, so through the chair, yes, but I think it's that type of resource is really quite specialized and skilled. We've actually made some approaches, and it has to be local. So we do have this great community of knowledge across the different innovating streets of successful award or submission councils. And we have Mike Lydon, who has actually advised us on our pop-up park. But the thing is, you have to have people on the ground to do this co-design work. They have to be at the table. They have to really kind of know our stakeholders. While it is a resource and time-intensive process, co-design, we need the right people in that capacity to do that work. They need to understand some of the technical issues that are raised by our chief executive. They need to be able to have a facilitation role to bring unlike-minded people to the table that may have different views on things to kind of bring this together. I call it, and this came out of our meeting with Claire and Waka Kotahi, it's finding the unicorn. Now, I don't think we have to find the magic unicorn, but we do have to find a unique talent that can help us actually achieve the success that we're expecting with this work. So it's kind of hard to find that person. We are looking for them.
And just in relation to some of the challenges that were identified. So at the last meeting where we discussed this, which I think was the April 23rd one, and I'm not sure if the question went to you, but so all due deference, I'm not sure who can answer it. But I mean, I specifically asked about the cross-fallen profile of Trafalgar Street and if it would have any problems, and we were assured that there wouldn't be the problems. I'm just wondering how they're now, you know, have since been identified, because I did specifically ask them at that 23rd of April meeting.
So through the chair, you know, we have no design, we have no technical specific thing that we've looked at that have determined that. We have taken cross sections through Trafalgar at the time of that meeting. We understood that there were challenges. We didn't have the exact design. We knew we couldn't have a step up from the footpath for this deck. So I've always been really clear that there are going to be technical challenges to achieve putting a kit that drops in or is built in place to achieve the footpath extension. There might be possibilities where we have less of that camber, that we can maybe try something small that may not have as much of that risk, but those spaces may still have other risks that Pat has brought up. So,
thank you. And just in relation to sort of smaller trials, and I don't know if this is something that Claire Pascoe can answer or someone else might be able to, is just in relation to Church Street, because that is a project where we have design, we have the consultation. Has there been any discussion with NZTA as to whether that would meet the Innovating Streets Fund criteria?
So through the chair, and Claire's certainly capable of adding, but we have not talked about Church Street. And I'm certainly aware that the previous work in Church Street that was done prior to my joining the council, there are a couple issues with Church Street. Our public life survey, we were really looking to do these interventions where we really have pedestrian numbers. Church Street is probably, it's certainly down the list quite a ways from Trafalgar. I think even more than that, and I'm certainly open to doing tactical work in Church Street and acknowledge the work that's been done prior, is I guess the timing or certainty around any work related to the warehousing of the museum. So I would, but tactical, we could move that out and then they could build that expansion and then we could, you know, but we haven't acknowledged, we haven't looked at that in terms of this funding application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Laurie, then Councillor Sampson, then Councillor Neil-Stevens, then Councillor Fulton, then Councillor McGurk. And is there anyone else I've missed at this point? Councillor Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a number of questions. So if you don't mind, I'll go through about 4 or 5 of them. The first question I've got, and I did let the staff know this question will be coming, is I'd like to know how much money have we spent and how much staff time have we spent on this whole Streets for People program so far to get us to this point where we are today? I think Mr. Levertis might, or Ms. Gabellini.
Through the Mayor, so yeah, Alan and I, we did a quick estimate. So the investment that we've made in the city and in building these relationships has been about 23 weeks. It's been a 23-week period, of which about 75% of Alan's time has been spent on this project and 35% of my time. So that's about 1,000 hours. And in terms of costs, we have spent about 20,000 on economic and retail data and analysis. That was looking at what the economic effects of placemaking are in city centres and having some experts come down and assist us with the breakfasts. About 6,000 on graphics in terms of the hybrids, and about 5,000 on the actual consultation itself for media, the public survey document and the two breakfasts and hiring of the Mycolab. The collab,
Thank you.
sorry.
Thanks. So that's 1,000 hours of your time when you could have been doing something else. And it was, yeah, but we got, okay, so that's significant. Given that we're looking at these hybrid models and they've got lots of different bits to them, am I right in thinking, through the chair, that all the features in this hybrid model that we're looking at have in fact had visibility because they were all features that were included in the options that we consulted or we asked for feedback on?
Through the Mayor, yes, all aspects of the two hybrids are parts of one or four of the options that we did seek public consultation on, but they are obviously arranged in a different arrangement than what was put out to the public.
Sure, thank you. So they have had visibility. I'm interested if you could talk through the chair a little bit to us about a comment on page 21 of the report, part 7.2. In your conclusion, it says the views expressed by the community and city centre business and property owners are evenly split over the four options consulted on. There is, however, a common theme that something needs to change in the city centre to better provide for people, even from those respondents who preferred option 4, which was do nothing. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please, through the chair?
Yes, so through the chair, there was feedback in the written documentation, and also we received feedback via Alan's engagement that, you know, there is general agreement that the city centre is looking tired and is in need of a refresh, and that it would be better, you know, it needs some work to be more people focused. And that, yes, that was even from respondents who preferred option 4, and obviously those respondents are concerned that in the options that have been presented and the hybrids, we haven't got the right balance of placemaking versus car parking loss.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going if it's okay, Madam Mayor. Through the chair, how many car parks would be lost under the hybrid option we're looking at today?
Through the chair, this is hybrid 2 that was distributed last night.
Yeah.
So we haven't really done a firm study of that. It depends. It would convert angle car parking to parallel. Whether or not we can get parallel on both sides, we need to look at. If that were the case, there are currently 17 angle car parks on the east side and the west side of that particular southern half block. And those would convert over to about 8 parallel on each side. So it would be a loss of 9 or possibly 10 once you get into the study. The question is, it depends on the width of the footpath extension, if we can create parallel on both sides. So I think that the short answer is you're probably similar to the first hybrid where you lose, if you can retain parallel parking on both sides, that you probably have a loss of 20 car parks from the total you have today.
Okay, through the chair, with the fantastic changes we've seen to parking availability due to the introduction of pay by plate, do you think those 20 car parks can now be found elsewhere in the city, or in the central city, because of changes to our parking system?
I guess through the chair, there's a few things tied up in that, Councillor. I think we don't have data over the summer period on pay by plate, so it's only been in place a month and a half at this point. We do have real-time data on it. There are some encouraging signals through it. It appears that the demand for that hour parking has decreased something like 42% over that first 6 weeks. I think what that suggests is workers have found maybe other ways of accommodating their parking needs, so they're not running back out to the meters as frequently. But we needed, I think, the feedback that we've had from retailers and task forces, we'd like to see that data over a longer period of time to understand the summer demands for parking. I think that there have also, and the mayor might want to touch on this too with some of her discussions, there's a sense, I think, with some businesses that those on-street car parks in front of shops on Trafalgar Street are different, provide a different offer than the ones in the squares where we have a different type of turnover with pay by plate. There are different user needs in those in terms of accessibility users. I don't have a lot of data to kind of clarify or to confirm that, but there is a sense that those parks are special and unique and they want to retain those.
Okay, thank you for that. It's my observation that since we introduced pay by plate, there are lots more car parks in the central city, a lot more than 20 extra car parks in the city each day as a result of our changes, the changes we've made, which I think most people have been supportive of. I've got one last question through you, Madam Mayor, if it's okay, and it's for the Chief Executive. Mr. Doherty, you said that if we go down this hybrid trial, because there are some unknowns, it could lead to things that will not enhance our reputation. Don't you think we also have we face a reputational risk if we don't do something, given everything we've heard, to make our central city a better place for people as soon as we can?
Personally, I think we'd be better to wait 6 or 9 months, and I know that may cost us some of the Waka Kotahi funding, sort out the details, get the resources right, wind down, slow down on some capital projects for the following year so we have the resources to do this and do it right. That's my view. Yeah. With respect, that wasn't my question. My question was, so feedback we've got has been roughly half, a lot of the respondents want us to close Trafalgar Street to traffic. And a lot of respondents say don't do anything. I'm saying if we do nothing now, we face reputational risk. And do you not think there's a possibility of that? Sorry, I'll be more specific. No, I think the reputational risk of waiting another 6 to 9 months is far less than the reputational risk of going out there and delivering something that has unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Laurie, I just want to come back to the 20 extra car parks. We're I just didn't follow that one. You will know. So just where are they? Is it because of removing machines that there've been new car parks?
No, it's because people aren't just parking in the middle of town all day for free, or using the 1 hour free and then moving their car, and using the 1 hour free and moving their car. They're not parking like they did in Trafalgar Street, in Wakatu Square, in Montgomery Square. And if you've spent any time in the central city since we made these changes, you'll see it.
I spend most of my life in the central city, councillor, but I just
you're probably spending too much time in your office.
I spend a lot of time out and about in the city as well.
And that's the feedback I've heard from.
Where does the 20 extra car parks come from?
Point of order.
Yeah, sorry.
Point of order. Councillor Laurie, having an attack on something pretty unrelated.
Wasn't it?
In your defence there, in regards to you spend too much time in your office, not time.
It was
enough time on the comment.
Street. It was
that a compliment or was that a criticism of your
leadership? I don't think Councillor Laurie is saying that as a criticism. I think he's recognising how busy the role is, and I'm probably the last person to leave this organisation pretty much every night as I leave here at 7:30 at night, councillor. So I think that's a recognition of the role, the extent of the role, which is why I work pretty much every weekend out and about as well. Try and take one off a month if I can. I know you all work really hard too, so I think we're going to keep with our values and be respectful, and it's about tone, councillor.
Agreed.
So, councillor, so when you said there are 20 extra car parks, you're meaning there aren't physically 20 more car parks?
Oh,
you know this is
there's
that's
20,
what I took
I'd
from
say,
your comment.
No. So what I'm saying is there are at least 20 more available parking spaces.
Oh, I don't know. Yes, I'd say it may even be more than that. So that's right.
No,
I took it as extra car parks.
No.
And I thought maybe by taking the meters out, we created some new ones that I'd missed. Thank you.
Sure you'd heard about that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Now, who is next? Councillor Sanson's next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through the chair. I've also got a number of questions, but I'll try and keep them short and efficient. So I guess my first one, just first of all, to Lisa and Alan, and I guess also to Pete for all the work that all of you have done on this. I just want to really acknowledge that, and say thanks heaps. I know that it's, well, we know now, look at that 1,000 hours. It's just been a massive, massive commitment of your time. So we appreciate the hard work you've been doing. On the investment today, the 1,000 hours and about 31,000 in costs. If we were to delay, would that, I guess, investment still be utilisable? Like, will we build on where we are at the moment, or by kind of stopping and not doing anything, are those kind of sunk or lost?
Absolutely, that's why we pitch it as an investment, that it's not costs associated with this project. All of that work and all of those relationships that Alan's building will feed into the spatial plan. And we would, if the recommendation that officers have proposed gets over the line today, well, we would carry on building on that investment as part of that spatial plan process.
Thanks very much. And then the next one, and this is maybe, I guess I'd initially thought of this for Claire Pascoe from Waka Kotahi, but then it sounds when Alan and Lisa were speaking that they've also done some work in this space. But I'm curious as to what the economic or the data showed around this kind of placemaking and enhancing the city for people. Does it show that it brings economic benefit to businesses in cities? And if Claire Pascoe has any information on
I think
that?
it might be set out in the report. Was it in your previous one? Previous one, in the previous report. So just very briefly, if you can reflect the...
So through the chair, I mean, it's very hard to be specific because there's no other example towns, that are like Nelson that are the same size in comparison. And maybe Claire is best to talk to this because there's a lot of case studies and examples on the Waka Kotahi website that show the benefits, the economic benefits of placemaking and cycling rather than car parking. But we don't, even though we have had First Retail assist us with that, we don't have any specific data for Nelson. But as part of this tactical trial, we would want to be working with Waka Kotahi to make sure that we set it up right and have the right monitoring indicators and work with those business owners so that we would be able to demonstrate that this was the effect in Nelson during this year.
And do we still have Claire Pascoe?
I'm just about to go across to her. So Claire, Claire, just I think you've heard the question. So we've had plenty of briefings on the value of public spaces and the value economically. But is there anything you would want to add, particularly that would be relevant to Nelson for this context?
Yeah, I guess you may have already heard of where we've seen this happening with economic evaluations done in Auckland. So obviously having the data available is always hard, but where we have seen spaces, been asked to start my video, hang on a minute, where we have seen actually some robust monitoring and evaluation of projects that have, say, reallocated space for people and away from car parks, you can see positive economic impacts. What we have more understanding of is a lack of economic benefits from parking. And actually this was a webinar that we hosted this morning. I don't know if anybody came along to the strategic parking management module. We can share it around afterwards, but we do have good evidence now from 2 or 3 or 4 cities around the country, including like the Hastings, the Hutt City, where there's been, I guess there is a really strong perception that parking equals good for business. And that is starting to have now a fair amount of New Zealand specific evidence that it is not the case. And we've even seen, for instance, in Hutt City a couple of years ago, their kind of free parking initiative, which was that reaction to thinking, parking equals good for business. They actually did the worst in terms of economic gains from the region that year. And so pretty quickly pulled out that free trial. So I think we are starting to have a much clearer evidence base that parking isn't the economic boon for business that we may think it is.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire. That's really helpful. So I guess this brings me to my next question, which is probably one for Lisa and Alan. And I guess one of my concerns when I hear how much time has been invested, the relationships that you've built up, the 15 task force meetings, the breakfasts, that doesn't sound like an insignificant amount of consultation and relationship building. That actually sounds, pretty good to me. And yet we have, overnight received 15 emails from businesses concerned at losing a few car parks. So I'm, wondering, is there any sense that we may postpone this and, even push other things out further because there is a concern from a few businesses, which is, I acknowledge their concerns. But then we may never be able to get them on board with the fact that we actually, enhancing these spaces for people inevitably means losing some car parks. I mean, that's just the hard reality. And as we've just heard from Claire Pascoe of Waka Kotahi, there is now New Zealand specific evidence to show that more car parks does not bring economic gain. So I'm just concerned that we're having a gut reaction to the fear of losing car parks when actually maybe we're never going to be able to reassure those people and those businesses. Do you think that that is a possibility, that we may never be able to bring those people on board and that we may just have to at some point make a bold and show some leadership in the space that we are going to do something really good for the broadest sector of the community?
So through the chair, yes, I think that we have to continue the engagement. I don't think we do engagement particularly well in this space. We have kind of an annual meeting with landlords and retailers and things. We need to be in front of these stakeholders much more frequently. It's not easy work, as you guys know. Answering these calls and answering these emails, it's difficult. And it takes an enormous amount of time. And it's emotional. I mean, we understand retail is in a unique situation right now. It's not just COVID. It's the effect of big box or it's online. The shopping that we do in our city centers is changing. First Retail talked a lot about where there might be retail gaps in our city center. We need to kind of continue to refine the mix to make sure the offer is a compelling proposition for people to come to the city center for shopping. We need to continue to work harder with these stakeholders. And while we have a task force, it's a really small representation. It came out of a street meeting that myself and Lisa, Pat, and Councillor Noonan attended on the 6th of May. And we wanted to have those voices at the table because they were really concerned. And they were businesses on Trafalgar Street, and they're locally owned businesses. Some have been in business 35 years or more. We wanted a task force with different faces. We have younger people, we have, male and female representatives. It's really good that we have a range of voices at that table. I guess what I'm saying is that we all play a part in this. And if we want to make change in the city center, we want to be bold about it. It's not on officers, it's on all of us to help with that. And I think that we need to do a lot more work in our space to engage with people. We need different systems in our organization that help with us to do that, because it is a lot of work. So I'm up for that, but we need to do spatial plans. We need to finish our work on projects we have underway in our city center. We need to find a way where we can all do that together.
Thanks very much, Ellen. That was really great response. So I guess it leads on to my next question then, which is really that obviously we have a recommendation today to kind of pause and effectively kind of do nothing from a streets for people perspective. But it sounds to me like we actually need to continue doing quite a lot, possibly trials, finding the unicorn, continuing on with, relationship building and the task force and that kind of thing. By maybe approving the recommendation to do nothing, does that mean that we're going to impact the potential for your team to actually continue on in this work? Is there not some kind of, should we be looking for some kind of middle ground where you are able to undertake maybe a trial with the boardwalk stuff on a, like a, half a side of Trafalgar Street or something like that? Or is it just, preference today is to kind of park everything and focus on spatial plan?
Through the chair, I think, we need advocates, I think, and I know that a number, and maybe Claire Pascoe can speak to this a little bit. Having advocates in your business sector who really want to support these sort of outcomes is really critical. We haven't found a lot of that yet. There are a couple that I know about. So maybe we can do smaller trials where they maybe take a bit more ownership to kind of see this thing succeed, and they can help us with the data on number of people coming in their shop or spend or things like that. And it's a smaller scale. May not achieve the sort of scale of change that we're looking at, I think, aspirationally, both in our submission or in the spatial plan where we're going, but people might have a taste for it. So I think if we can identify those people and do, I think, what the chief executive said, and do possibly a smaller scale intervention that allows us to access this great funding, but it's manageable. It'll still take a lot of time. I'm not going to kid you. Even a small project that's a quarter of the scale of project isn't 25% of someone's time. It's still going to require a lot of time to do co-design. But if we can find those local advocates that say, yeah, I want to kind of try this. I'll be willing to remove 3 or 4 car parks in front of my space. I'll step up for that and support you. That might be a way we could look at doing something. I don't know those advocates out there right now.
So, Councillor Sanson, it's just how many more questions? They're quite long.
No, just like 1 or 2.
All right, okay. We'll get into questions.
So, thanks, Madam Mayor, through the chair. So I guess if it sounds to me like you really need people in the community, so businesses in the community who want to see change, they actually need to approach you and say, hey, we're up for it. Can use us as a trial or our space in front of our shop. If they come to you, if we pass this recommendation today and then they come to you, are you going to be able to do stuff, or by approving the recommendation in front of us today, does that just kind of go, no, we can't, nothing can be done? I think I'm just trying to understand the implications of the recommendation.
So I guess our view as officers with our recommendation is that we do the spatial plan and then we get on and do this. I'm not saying that we say no forever. It's just sequencing the right moves that help people understand where we're going with our vision, and then see what the role of these sort of projects might be in that vision.
Thank you.
And if I could just add to that, so that I don't say the recommendation isn't a do nothing recommendation. It's a recommendation to retain what we've got and carry on with the spatial plan.
That's really helpful. Thanks very much. No more questions at the moment. Thanks.
Councillor Neil Stevens.
Thanks, through you, Madam Mayor. Perhaps either to Claire or Alan and Lisa, just around that co-design process, you spoke about how we need to do potentially a lot more engagement. Is that not the sort of purpose of the co-design process, to bring people along with us?
So I might, through the chair, I think my read on that, and I might defer to Claire Pascoe a little bit more on this because she's more knowledgeable in co-design. I think it's around having a lot of people at the table to come up with that idea. It's a little bit different than engaging your broader business community about what we might be doing. It's actually having somebody at the designer table. The designer isn't hired. He comes back 3 weeks later with an idea. We have key stakeholders around the table informing what the opportunities and what those sort of value propositions could be by whatever we come up with. So some of them are at the table, but it's not the same as full engagement. Claire?
Yeah, I'll just get my video going again. One thing, sorry, my office is a bit noisy. One thing I was going to add is, from a co-design perspective, the reason we've been talking about that is because one of the core tenets of tactical urbanism and this methodology that's new is it is in itself a form of consultation. And so the idea that traditionally we take to our communities pictures and designs where we ask them to imagine something that could be quite different from today, and you know, there's a lot of fear and anxiety about what that change will mean. The idea of actually trialing or piloting and getting feedback in real time in situ, so that not only they're getting feedback based on actual experience of the change, but you'll get a much broader range of voices providing you feedback. So people who may not, you know, get involved with kind of traditional engagement, but who walk down the space are more likely to be represented in the types of feedback you'd get. So one thing I'd just say, and that we're trying to really promote, is to think of these pilots or trials as a form of consultation. You haven't put concrete on the ground. It's not something that is irreversible forever, and you can take on the feedback and actually test and see what happens. So decisions about permanent installations will be fully evidence-based.
Thanks, Claire. That was really helpful.
Yeah, and perhaps just in addition to that, to you again, Claire, in your experience, do you need everyone fully on board before starting that co-design process, or you know, you've said it as it is sort of a form of consultation, but from sort of your perspective and your experience, can you do it when not all of those stakeholders are fully on board yet?
Yeah, and I mean, I should acknowledge, you know, I'm not a practitioner in this space, so I'm understanding and kind of learning through what we're hearing on the ground. But certainly from examples like the High Street in Auckland, what co-design meant to them is that people who you're affecting are inputting into the design. So for instance, they're there helping you understand that actually what they need is loading zones at 8 in the morning, because that's when they're trying to get their supplies. And so that kind of insight is shared not only with the transport professionals, but the people who actually know their street better than anyone else. And that's the sort of feedback you want to get into the design. Having said that, I would definitely say the reason that we are trialling this methodology is that projects in city centres where space is hotly contested will never get 100% support from anybody. And that's the point of trialling and kind of reducing these anxieties around change. So if you are looking for 100% support, or even I'd say 2/3, that's really unlikely, and it's really also why we are giving this methodology a shot, to see if we can find other new ways to help take communities on these tricky journeys of change.
Thank you.
Now, Alan, Lisa, just sort of based off of some of Pat's earlier comments, has the kit we'd be looking at using, has that been used elsewhere in New Zealand? I know we've seen photos from Auckland Council.
So through the chair, yeah, so High Street is an obvious benchmark that we've been discussing with our working group and council over the last several months. That is a bespoke piece of frame that was built specifically for that, you know, so the idea that we can build it offsite and drop it overnight, which has come up quite a few times, it is going to be bespoke. It is going to be something that's going to need to fit that particular application on our street. So we need to figure out how we do that, but it is based on High Street. You're right. There's a lot of similarities.
And have you spoken? Well, I guess you were there for some of it, but have you spoken to Auckland Council about some of the concerns that Pat's raised?
Through the chair, yes. So that was a piece of work that was done in the office I was previously a part of, and the person that came into the role after I moved here actually finished the High Street work. It is a different project than we have here. They don't have big trees dropping leaves. The footpath width extensions aren't the sort of scale that we're talking about here. That is a street that with narrow footpaths had lots of trash and rubbish and, you know, loading. So we have different issues here that we're looking to address, but we do have good sound information on the unit costs of that type of project, how they dealt with giving access to service lids and those sort of things. So we have some knowledge. It's not going to answer all of our questions for Trafalgar Street.
And then just on parking, we see here since the pay by plate, we've got a 45% average occupancy rate. Do we have data on peaks?
Yep, so we can get it, but we don't have it here.
Okay, thanks. And then one final question, if I may. You spoke about the sort of finding that unicorn and the specific resources needed for the co-design process. when you were describing that, I was thinking of someone very much like yourself. What's needed for the spatial plan? Is that something that we could bring in someone else, knowing that we might not necessarily find a unicorn, but someone is the sort of requirements for someone working on the spatial plan easier to fill than filling the role of a co-design
So
lead?
through the chair, I might defer to my manager on that.
Wise.
So could we bring in a mule to do the spatial plan?
Or a Pegasus, perhaps?
So through the chair, I don't know, we have some, as you're aware, a council resolved to give us some funding from the Climate Change Reserve to help us, help Alan draft the spatial plan. So we have a couple of capable consultants helping us do that. But the thing is, like with co-design and the spatial plan, it still requires Alan to be overseeing and to be intimately involved and to be making all those relationships to get it over the line and to benefit from all that investment going forward when we want to do future projects. So I don't think, we have looked, obviously we've tried to cut it the best way we can cut it. And, like we want to do everything at once, but we just can't.
Thanks.
Okay. I've got Councillor Fulton, Councillor McGurk and Councillor Courtney, but we've now been sitting down for over an hour and a half. So I think we're going to take a little break just to have a stretch for maybe just for five, no more than 10 minutes. And then this meeting is timetabled to finish at 5. So we're going to have to move through. Just to give you a little bit of a steer at the moment, I've been doing a lot of listening, and the challenge I have with the recommendation in the report is it feels to me like stop, and it feels like it's moving the opportunities almost completely out of not a 6 to 9 month period, but much longer than that. And that's one of the things that's causing me some concern. So just as we're going through the questions, what I'm interested in is maintaining the relationships and some momentum. I'm not feeling at the moment that we have got, and Alan and Lisa have been very clear on this all the way through about their strong support for their recommendation. In my head, I'm thinking about how we can keep and be true to the message that we've had from our community, which was actually from everyone, that we do want to see some investment in our public spaces and our urban spaces. It's just how and when we go about doing that. Okay, so we'll have a break for 10, say 1:45. ask you if you were in Wellington or Auckland.
Oh, sorry, was that a question for me? I just dialed back in.
That's okay. We're just resuming the meeting. Everyone's just going to sit down and be ready to go, hopefully any second now. I'll just ask you, if you're at the tea and coffee area, if you could just if you're at the tea and coffee area, do you think you could just be a little bit quieter so I could get on with the meeting? That would be helpful. Claire, are you in Wellington or Auckland? I forgot to ask you.
Yes, I'm in Wellington.
You're in Wellington. Okay, that's good. Now it's always like to sort of visualise where somebody is. So next on my list, Claire's going to stay with us for another 20 minutes. So I want any questions that you've got first up, and I'll stick with the order that I've got, which is Councillor Fulton, Councillor McGurk and Councillor Courtney. If you've got any specific questions for Claire, can I get these first? So I'll go through so in that order, and then anybody else. So, okay, so starting with Councillor Fulton, any questions for Claire?
Thank you. Yes, my questions were for Claire. Thank you, Claire, for joining us at our meeting today. I can't actually see your face right now, whereas I could before, so it's sometimes, there you are. Hi, good afternoon. Look, I really enjoyed hearing you talk and hearing some of your thinking around this process. And for me right now, I think what's happened is we've kind of hit a stumbling block, and I don't think we should stop. These kinds of reports make me want to cry, honestly. I think that there was so much excitement and so much enthusiasm about this project, and I think that the community, of all the things that came out of COVID, this was one of the projects which really excited our community. At the same time, I do understand that there's fear, and that there's fear for change, and that there's a lot of uncertainty. So ideally, we want to take as much of our community with us as we can on that journey. And I think that at the moment, one of the things that probably Alan in particular is experiencing, and I really want to acknowledge that, is that generally you hear from people who don't want something rather than from the people who do want something. So we're at this sort of critical point in time, and we're also running out of time because of the NZTA funding pressure to deliver by next June. So some of my questions were around, what I heard from you was that we've obviously got staff who are at capacity and very stretched, and feeling a lot of pressure to deliver multiple projects, including the spatial plan. And what I heard from you was that you would like to support NCC to continue on this journey, even if it's not as big as what we set out to begin with. And so I just wanted to find out, in terms of that human resources, how do you see that fitting in, if that was a direction we wanted to take in terms of looking at a hybrid model?
Yeah, so if, say, you were interested in progressing this hybrid model, which is a smaller scope than what originally came to us, but to be honest, we'd really support that. We're keen to kind of support a smaller scope as well, because we think we're all kind of getting the hang of this methodology. One of the things that we could do is have a conversation about that money that's been allocated, potentially some of it being used for people time to, I guess, address some of those resourcing gaps. Given now that your scope, if it goes ahead, it might be smaller, we could talk about reallocating some of those costs, and I'm sure we would be happy to have that conversation. Yeah, so does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. And my second question is around, in terms of, you touched on this briefly, I think another councillor asked a question, in terms of how part of the process of the designing, co-designing, is that you work with the community in that design process. So that human resourcing could assist us with that. So we might end up, in terms of what we actually deliver physically, might be less, but what we might end up with by next June is at least we've had more conversations with our community, and we've reignited the excitement. For me, that's key today, that we go out. We know we've kind of had a low point, and we know our staff are tired, but can we reignite that excitement in terms of shaping our city into the future? So do you see that part, a key part of the process, that if we were going to look at tactical urban design, maybe on a smaller part of Trafalgar Street, and maybe on Bridge Street and Hardy Street, where there's been less controversy, and then possibly Councillor Edgar mentioned Church Street, possibly looking at smaller projects in less controversial places that human resourcing could support that process.
Definitely the smaller scoping and the human resourcing, and we've put together a preferred supplier list that could potentially help you tap into some of that resourcing in their areas where people have workshop facilitation expertise and co-design expertise. In terms of the less controversial, that would be one we'd have to look at case by case. Less controversial often relates to there's less of actually a problem of an area. So that one, I guess, is less. Doesn't necessarily mean that that site might be as aligned with the fund, which is about in areas where we can really get big benefits for people, where there's opportunities to encourage more people to walk and cycle. And if there is an area where it's not contentious, it could be because it's not a place people want to go. So that one would depend on the context.
Oh, that's incredibly helpful. So this is quite a big shift for NZTA to want to be a little bit different. So I'm really excited about that. That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Claire. That really helps my thinking.
Thank you, Claire. I'll just see if there's any more questions for you. Councillor McGurk's next, I think.
Yeah, I think most of my questions have already been asked and answered. I just want to be just a bit of clarity from you, Claire. Thank you very much. Just the tone of the questions was about the co-design was about a thing. And I'm just wondering if we could just back it up about what this thing, if we do a bit of work or use some of your funding to tap into the community to describe what that thing might look like as before we start actually talking about what that thing is.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so that's the question. So is that funding for the Innovative Streets for that thinking and discussion? And I'm thinking about like a sort of a citizen planning or a workshop facilitation, that type of thing.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So the fund is definitely for a thing, but it's so there needs to be some physical installations in the street. It's certainly not a fund for kind of just planning, because that's kind of what we're trying to circuit break, is just living in kind of a constant planning phase without getting things delivered on the ground. I would say though that the my thought has completely lost my mind. It'll come back to me in a second, but maybe does that help answer that one?
Probably not quite the answer I would have liked.
Yeah, no, so it's not a fund just to sort of set up a conversation with the community. It's really about delivering the purpose of, that's what I was going to say. For us, we're really driven this fund by the outcomes of making it easier and faster to transition our streets to be safer and more livable. So we're looking for these outcomes of more space for people and easier and safer to walk, cycle, and reduce that dependency on vehicles. So those are the outcomes, but we can't get those outcomes without actually physically doing things on our street. So that's definitely an expectation for the money, is that it results in some changes to the street, which results in that outcome. However, I would say that we're really encouraging all of our councils and the projects to start at the starting point of what are you trying to achieve? Are you really clear on what success looks like before you jump into a design conversation? So if you can get agreement with your stakeholders that good should look like, not necessarily parking, because that's a design conversation, but it should look like more people coming into our town centre, more people spending money in our shops, people expressing that they're finding it safer and easier. So it's really important to establish what success looks like at the beginning before jumping into a design conversation.
Thank you, appreciate
Thanks,
the
Claire.
answer.
That's great. Any other questions for Claire? Councillor Newton.
I'll ask you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Courtney,
Yes.
then Councillor Newton.
Claire, I'm just curious, did you follow our process during COVID where we closed, well, we were putting out the idea of extending the pathways, footpaths of both sides of Trafalgar Street, Bridge Street and Hardy Street? Did you follow that?
I did. I saw some of the articles. I know we had a few conversations with Alan about it.
No funding from you though, was there for that? No.
No, I think those hadn't come to us for an application yet. Is that right, Alan? You can jog my memory.
Yeah. What I'm trying to glean from you is the fact that it was a major. I think in that instance we went too far, too fast, and I'm heartened, as Kate is, Councillor Fulton is, by your statements today that you're up for these smaller scoped projects.